I assume I don't have to tell you what that is. If I do, we're in a lot of trouble here. We're going to have to do a completely different kind of show. I have to explain to you that is a song by Joni Mitchell. It is the title track from the album Blue, which is 50 years old this year. And that is what we are going to talk about for the entire show. This is the second entire show about Joni Mitchell. We are clearly a Joni Mitchell show. I mean, Tapestry is 50 years old this year. We could have done that, but we're clearly a Joni Mitchell franchise here. And I feel okay about that. But I'd feel okay about being a Carole King franchise, too. So here to do that with us, here to have that conversation, are the following people. Peter Kaminsky is professor of music theory and associate department head of undergraduate studies at UConn, and there's a special connection that he has to this particular album, which we will explain as we go along here. Steve Metcalf, of course we wouldn't do this without Steve Metcalf, journalist, music critic, pianist, composer, currently director emeritus at President's College at the University of Hartford, and Carol Ann Solabello, singer, songwriter, and founding member of the American trio Red Molly. She tours with the folk quartet No Fuss and Feathers, and she's a proud member of the Jack Hardy Songwriters Exchange. She also has a very special relationship with this material, which we will also explain. But Carol Ann, if it's okay, I'd like to just begin with you.
Absolutely.
Hi,
Colin.
Hi. So I'm going to just get you to react to this song and maybe what it was like when you first heard it. But before we do that, this is a game that Mr. Metcalf and I also like to play from time to time. But correct me if I'm wrong. I have a sense that if there had never been a Joni Mitchell until now, and this song dropped yesterday or today, I feel like you and Phoebe Bridgers and Brandi Carlile and Jason Isbell and anybody else you can think of would just sort of step back and go, "What is that? That's amazing." I mean, yeah. I feel like this doesn't sound like a product of 50 years ago. It just sounds like if it came out today, people would be going, "Wow, that's very fresh and interesting."
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I heard it, 20 years after it was released, and it sounded new and fresh and exciting and stunning to me. Absolutely stunning. I heard this as a college student, you could have knocked me over with a feather when I heard this record for the first time in its entirety, and that song in particular, because it's, my relationship with it deepened as I grew older, but just completely enigmatic and completely out of time. You can't place it.
Right. Can you say a little bit? I mean, we're going to hear you sing that song in a little while, which is a very brave thing for anybody to do.
Crazy.
But just say a little bit more. You're hearing it for the first time. I don't know. What else are you noticing about it?
That song in particular, it seemed naked to me. Mm-hmm. It seemed absolutely naked and yet completely enigmatic. It's like, what are you talking about? Songs are like tattoos. Okay, I think I can relate to that. And who is Blue? Is Blue a person? Is Blue a feeling? Is Blue a state of mind? It just it seemed to touch on something even beyond the words.
Yeah,
There's something about the music that touches deeply.
I think the answer to all those questions is yes, but I'm not the big expert here. You guys are. So Peter Kaminsky, she said something about Joni Mitchell sounding kind of emotionally naked on this. This is something that Joni Mitchell can and confirm and has confirmed, right? That she was feeling very defenseless at the time she wrote this.
Yeah, Malcolm Aram is going to be one of the invited speakers at our conference tomorrow. And in her book, which is a book of interviews with Joni Mitchell that took place over like 3 decades, Joni Mitchell in that book told her about a dream that she had when she was working on Blue. And it's something like she was viewing a bunch of obese women playing tubas on a stage. And she was sitting in the audience, but it wasn't her. It was a plastic bag filled with her organs, her guts, just kind of spilled out sitting there. And I actually had an email from Malka yesterday saying, just maybe I'll talk about that in as part of my session tomorrow, just like how Joni was feeling. I mean, that's just such a riveting description of the kind of, nakedness and defensiveness that she was in. But, it's funny because I think that kind of delving really deeply into artists' emotional and psychological states at the time that they write something, that can be a little bit of a dangerous game, because in a sense, and maybe you guys will disagree with me, but I feel like it calls more attention to the circumstances, like the source circumstances leading to the music that was created rather than the music itself.
Yeah.
So I think it's really, I think it's really easy with Blue to get hung up on, oh, she broke up with Graham Nash and she was having an affair during this with James Taylor and all of that stuff, and kind of not focusing enough on, why is this such a landmark album?
Right.
What is making it?
First of all, Peter, I do want to say I have that dream every night. I thought I was the only person who had it, except that one of the obese women is playing a tenor recorder. But other than that, it's identical to what you described. But
I think I was at that concert.
yeah, I feel so much less alone now. We should quickly say, Peter, the conference you're referring to, you should probably just set that up a little bit. This is a conference tomorrow. Explain what this is.
So this being, you've already said this is the 50th anniversary of the release of Joni Mitchell's album Blue. So me and my colleagues, really my two graduate students who are co-organizers for the conference, took that as a pretext to not only talk about Blue, but to celebrate her life and music. And so we wanted to have a conference that presented research on her music, but also did a little bit more than that as well. So it starts at 9, it runs till 4:30, and besides the presentation of scholarly research, we're going to have 2 student performances, one of Blue to kick off the conference, and the other is an arrangement of one of the students in my class, in my sophomore class, who's a composition major. It's a wonderful arrangement for chamber choir of A Case of You. And then the other kind of big thing here is that at noontime, right in the dividing the first and second half of the conference, the president president of the university, Tom Katsoulias, is going to confer the honorary doctorate on Joni Mitchell. UConn is the first United States university that will be giving her a doctorate. Wow. She's collected them from University of Saskatchewan and McGill, but not from anywhere in the U.S. So this is taking place tomorrow.
I thought you were going someplace else because Joe Biden does an amazing cover of Coyote. And I thought maybe you were going to you meant a different president. But all right, so Steve Metcalf, I'm going to ask you the same question, and you're going to answer it probably any way you want to. Although maybe I can bring up right at this point one thing that I'm sort of sensing here when I listen to it now, which is this is sort of a breakthrough landmark statement kind of album, but I feel, Steve, like it's also a little bit of a liminal album where this is the last album that has songs in it that would connect her plausibly to the folk scene, and a lot of songs that don't at all do that. You can almost feel her hacking away at the umbilicus that connects her to the folk scene. That by the next album, For the Roses, she's not going to sound anything like a song like Carrie. But I don't know, Metcalf, you're just going to say whatever you want anyway. So why am I even setting you up?
Well, what I want to say, and what I guess I will say, is that not to play the age card here, but I think I'm the oldest of this little panel. And I can certainly remember very well when Blue was released. And I think it's important to say, actually, as a sort of a connecting thought to what you and Carol Ann were just talking about. And that is when Blue came out, I mean, certainly among musical people, and especially among women, I have to say, which is a little side topic we can get to. Of course, it was recognized as this tremendously interesting step forward, particularly from her previous stuff. But interestingly enough, it wasn't a blockbuster album. In other words, it wasn't a Tapestry or a Sgt. Pepper or a Thriller or whatever. I mean, it was a kind of quietly well-received, well-respected piece of work that really wasn't a great commercial bombshell. In fact, I think it peaked at like number 15 or something. And so the interesting thing to me, among them interesting things, is that we're 50 years later, we're talking about this as the milestone that it surely is. And the Rolling Stone list of 500, recently revised it upward from 30 to number 3. and yet it's been a kind of a slowly building recognition over these decades in a way that I'm not sure I can think of any other album that has performed that way. It has just gradually, as perhaps Joni herself has gradually sort of come to be recognized as this towering figure.
We're going to play another song from the album, a clip of it anyway. This is Little Green.
He went to California, hearing that everything's warmer there. So you write him a letter and say, her eyes are blue. He sends you a poem and she's lost to you. Little green, he's a non-conformer, just a little green, like the color when the spring is born.
So, Carol Ann, so many things I want to ask you about this, but I mean, can we agree that this is probably a song that could have appeared on one of the 3 previous albums? I mean, it does sound a little bit like what she had sounded like so far.
Yes, absolutely. It fits into, at least, sonically fits into that folk milieu, But as far as the subject matter goes, I think it was an enormous leap.
Tell us about the subject matter.
The subject matter is, for those, I mean, a lot of listeners probably already know this, but she was writing about a child that she gave up for adoption. I had and it was just, to me, this is also a part of the nakedness of this record. It's like, although I don't want to get, into, as Peter said earlier, it's probably less important to talk about the place that the artist was in when they wrote the songs than the effect they have on other people. But I think women in particular hearing this song, and even if they didn't know the particulars, you can kind of piece it together, and it is a story, whether or not it was personal or not. I think a lot of women would relate to this, the giving up of something, the losing of a lover, and the reaching out to the lover, and grappling with the problems of possibly raising a child alone, realizing that you're not up to the task, and doing the hardest thing there is to do to release little green into the world, alone with, to someone else's care. This one digs deep, and it digs deep for me as a grown-up now, as a parent, so.
Yeah. Well, while I've got you, I wanted to ask about another aspect of this, which is that and I know that this is kind of dear to your heart too, that there's a way in which maybe back to Steve's point too, this was, one of the products of its time that really was, I think, intended to be an album that would really hang together. It wasn't, a couple of singles and some other stuff. It was really, I think, her idea of a statement up to and including. And this is a point that I hadn't really thought that much about until I saw that you had talked about it to Betsy Kaplan. The cover, the painting, there's a way in which, she's unusual among musical artists in the sense that well, first of all, she's got an album called Blue that has a song called Little Green. She had another album called Turbulent Indigo. She did a song called Big Yellow Taxi. And we're starting to see a little bit of a pattern here. But there's a way in which it's less easy to unthread the musical artist from the visual artist with her.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. The way she writes about visual imagery, the way she writes about colors. I mean, even not on this record, but going forward, I'm thinking right now the image that's in my mind is the six planes in a song called Amelia, which comes on a later record, Hijira. But she's always painting pictures with words for her listeners, as well as, as I talked about with Betsy, painting the covers of her albums. This was one of the few that she did not paint herself. It is a photograph of herself in a blue wash, but just about every other cover, I think, was a creation of her own hand, painting her self-portrait in one way or another.
Peter Kaminsky, one thing that also occurred to me today was that Joni Mitchell and Miles Davis were both serious painters, have iconic albums with the word blue in their titles. And then I did a little bit more reading, and I found out that they knew each other. And, this is from an article, I think that's about Miles. Joni Mitchell describes how he called her one day and said, "Joni, I like that painting that you did. Nice colors. I want to come over and watch you paint." Davis, her musical hero, wouldn't record with her, though she found out later that he owned all of her records. He would talk painting, and he wouldn't talk music with me. But Peter, I think very, very early on, she is starting not just to be influenced by jazz musicians, but to influence jazz musicians.
That's a really interesting point. I think it's borne out by how many jazz musicians have been interested in and recorded her works. In our email, you mentioned Cassandra Wilson and Brad Meldau. I'd also call attention to the Joni letters that Herbie Hancock recorded and won a Grammy for, which is a wonderful thing. Then a pianist that appeared at school, Fred Hirsch, has covered her music, and when we saw him in recital at UConn, did a beautiful job with A Case of You. And so you're right that influence goes both ways. Interesting. I didn't know about the Miles Davis, A, being a painter, and B, having this kind of painting connection with Joni. That's really interesting. It makes perfect sense.
It does. And the fact that he didn't play on her albums, Steve and I know this from our Laura Nero thing. It doesn't necessarily mean he didn't like her music. Sometimes Miles wouldn't play on your album if he thought you'd said everything that he would have wanted to say. And I would guess it was the case here. But just to your point, Peter, I'm going to play. This is kind of amazing, all right? This is one of my aperçus of today as I was geeking out about all this. So in 1971, when the album comes out, Keith Jarrett and his trio immediately, it's Keith Jarrett who I think wants to do this, but he's got Paul Motian and, Charlie Hayden. They go into the studio and they record this. So, and this is so the album comes out. Keith Jarrett listens to it for a few weeks and goes, "Well, I got to play this song." That's all I want for people who are having trouble placing it. And Steve Metcalf, after I geeked out on Blue all day, I started listening to For the Roses, which is the album that comes next. And I feel like on For the Roses, you can hear everything that's coming. You can hear Hejira and Hissing of Summer Lawns and stuff like that. And there is a point right around then where Joni Mitchell, it really doesn't make any sense anymore to try to figure out who she's listening to and who she might have influenced. I mean, it became clear to me that Jarrett, right up to Colin, is playing piano kind of a little bit the way he hears Joni Mitchell play it on For the Roses. It really becomes the case that this, or you may disagree, but I doubt it, that this is such a purely original artist, Joni Mitchell, that it's a waste of time thinking whether she was listening to Fauré and Ravel or something. She just might decide to sound a certain way on her own.
Yeah,
I think that's right, Colin. One of my little aperçus, if it counts, in just listening nonstop over the last few days, is really that I think, as your little clip illustrates, that the jazz world was really the first sort of piece of the profession to fully recognize the immensity of this talent. And jazz people, as a general rule, I think it is more of a meritocracy in some ways, and they're not as interested in whether you've had any top 10 hits and that sort of thing. In fact, quite the opposite. Right. So I think even though, the conventional wisdom used to be, well, it wasn't until Joni got together with the LA Express guys or with Jaco Pastorius that the jazz influence really was felt. I think it actually was. It does go back to Blue, and it certainly goes back to For the Roses. And I think the jazz world helped usher her into the full sunlight of the appreciation by the wider culture, so that she's not just this, clear-voiced kind of Canadian folk singer. She is a monumental talent.
So we are going, and it is. I mean, I had a moment today where I thought she was really influenced by Keith Jarrett, and then I realized, no, Keith Jarrett is really influenced by her, right down to the piano playing. All right, so another aperçu I had today that's maybe a little bit risky to say, but I actually think the people who Carol Ann is going to talk about what it's like to cover a Joni Mitchell song right on the other side of this break. But among the people who seem to be able to very successfully cover these very difficult songs are often black artists. I'm thinking of at the 75th birthday concert, Seal's unbelievable rendition of Both Sides Now, and Shaka Khan kind of nailing Help Me. But like nobody ever covered Joni Mitchell like this guy. Here's Prince doing his famous version of A Case of You.
Remember you told me love was touching souls. Sure, you touched mine. A part of you pours out of me from time to time. These lines. Songs are like tattoos. You know I've been to sea before. Crown and anchor me, or let me sail away. Hey blue, here is a song for you. Ink on a pin. Underneath the skin, an empty space to fill in. There's so many sinking now. You gotta keep thinking we can make it through these waves.
Wow, I hadn't heard that yet. Woo. I'm tearing up here a little bit. This is one of our guests, Carol Ann Solobello, performing live at WFMT FM in Chicago in 2014, doing the song Blue. We are celebrating the 50th anniversary of the album, the Joni Mitchell album Blue, today with Carol Ann, with Peter Kaminsky from UConn, who is, in fact, hosting a conference on the album this weekend, or no, actually tomorrow. Joni Mitchell's Blue at 50 at UConn's School of Fine Arts. And, of course, Steve Metcalf, our resident music guru savant and everything else. And I also want to just do a quick extra shout-out to Kat Pastor, who's handling all this music for us today, despite the fact that she has a terrible hangover from getting her Johnson & Johnson vaccine yesterday. Are you sure that they gave you the vaccine? They didn't inject you with the baby shampoo, did they? Yeah, okay. So I hope they gave you a Johnson & Johnson Band-Aid afterwards, too. It seems only right. Anyway, so she's still amazing. All right, so Carol Ann, wow. That's just, I mean, these songs, they are not written for anybody else to sing, right? I mean, I think we know Joni Mitchell couldn't give a rat's patootie whether anybody else could sing one of these songs. They were written for her to sing. So that's got to be very daunting as you approach it.
Absolutely, and it was especially daunting for me as you probably can tell from my speaking voice, I am a natural alto. Mm-hmm. Joni was, in those days, a clear soprano, and she would float those notes way up high. For me, it's a little more of a like a plane taking off to get there, a little more effort to get to those high notes. But yeah, it was an adventure in more ways than one, and so I was daunted by it. Just to for your listeners' sake, that song was performed as part of a full concert of the whole Blue album in sequence, uninterrupted by any kind of talking, with a group of other women singer-songwriters. It was in celebration of on the heels of the 40th anniversary of the record. We started performing it on tour in the beginning of 2014, 2011, I guess, 2012. Sorry, we put the project together in 2011, started performing 2012. But every song had a different singer. And for me, I was kind of left with Blue. I didn't really want to sing Blue because it was so weird and enigmatic, and I had no idea how to approach it. But in the end, I ended up approaching it as more of an acting exercise. I have a background in theater, and I sort of saw it as a cabaret song, almost as a musical theater song, as a piece of acting. You can't see me doing it, but it became a monologue for me, and so that made it a little less daunting. So I could put my own stamp on it while singing the same notes that Joni did, but not worrying about letting them sound pretty. I didn't have to imitate.
Can I ask Carol Ann a question?
Sure, you may.
First of all, Carol Ann, that is tremendously impressive. Congratulations.
Thank
you. I'm wondering here whether for a singer there's a special set of challenges here, because if you replicate exactly the way Joni renders these very baroque and complicated melody lines, then of course you run the risk of being accused of just trying to replicate what she does. If on the other hand, you style it a little bit in your direction, you run the risk of people accusing you of not being faithful to the Joni vision or whatever it is. It seems to me like a singer is presented with some really unusual challenges here.
Yeah, it was most definitely a fine line to tread, which is why I took a different way in and said, well, how would I phrase that? I mostly phrase as Joni did and tried to justify those phrasings, where to breathe and how to breathe, and to allow Joni's rendition to lead me. Like, for instance, you heard in that last clip, I allowed my voice to break in kind of a way that is not what any voice teacher would tell you that is the wrong thing to do. But Joni did it all the time, and in a different way, because her voice was different in a different place. But it made it okay for singers like me to allow that to happen in the place where it naturally would happen, and it serves the song emotionally. As long as what you're doing is serving the song emotionally, I think it's okay. So it made it helped me internalize what was going on, and having permission from Joni to make it sound less pretty and more emotional was okay.
It is easy to fail doing this, and even referencing, once again, that 75th birthday concert. I mean, Brandi Carlile, who's one of the great singers of our time, but she really struggles with Down to You. She's somebody who uses that voice break thing a lot, but she's really having a hard time in that concert, really sort of figuring out how to do this song and hit that sweet spot that Metcalf is talking about. So Metcalf, I think we should also talk about just, and I should just say that, in our 40 years or however long we've known each other, Steve Metcalf can play anything on the piano. Anything he's ever heard, he can play. But if we're standing around the piano doing some songs or something, we don't do a lot of Joni Mitchell songs, and I think there's a reason for that. And before we get into that reason, let's hear a little bit of My Old Man, because I think it kind of makes that point.
He's my sunshine in the morning. He's my fireworks at the end of the day. He's the warmest chord I ever heard. Play that warm chord, play and stay, baby. We don't need no piece of paper from the city hall, keeping us tight and true. My old man, keeping away my blues. But when he's gone, me and them lonesome blues collide. The bed's too big, the frying pan's too wide. Then he
I was struck by that geeking out today, Steve, partly because, My Old Man starts out sounding like a semi-conventional song with a semi-conventional segment. And then you get to that freaking bridge and it just falls off the table and you're not in Kansas anymore. And it's just, and then there's this incredible line that Cole Porter or Ira Gershwin would have been thrilled to write. The bed's too big, the frying pan's too wide. Just the whole thing is kind of incredible, but it's not conventional piano playing, I don't think.
Well, that's for sure, and it's also not conventional stand around a piano and sing with a drink in your hand either. I mean, truthfully, and this gets into the, to me, very interesting question with Joni of hits, because here's this monumental figure for over a half a century, and relatively few, if any, bona fide hits, as the business would define that term. But in any case, you can predict. I've been at this a while. You can predict the songs that people may want to sing along with somebody at a piano, and they are almost exclusively her handful of early radio songs, Chelsea Morning or Both Sides Now, or I guess Circle Game, depending on how old a crowd you're dealing with. But no, these are just not, as I think Carol Ann would agree, these are not sing-along tunes in any sense. I mean, even the songs of hers that got some good radio play, like Help Me, for example, from Chord and Spark, is really not a tune people can sit around and sing in a sort of party situation. So what you said sort of applies to about 75% of her material, I think, and it's both why she's so interesting, but also maybe why there weren't hits in the conventional sense.
Yeah, Peter Kaminsky, I think you actually are also dealing with a whole bunch of students who may want to tackle this stuff. I mean, sort of, what do you find about that, about the challenge of just, trying to do something that is very idiosyncratically written?
Well, you mentioned A Case of You before, and I mentioned that one of the students in my sophomore theory class is a double major in vocal performance and in composition, which is very, very unusual in our department. And she has written, I'm a little bit biased, I'll freely admit to that, but she has written the most beautiful arrangement and has found such different things and nooks and crannies in the harmony and the form and the gestures and textures of that song. It is totally original. I just heard the final recording late last night. Everything has been, kind of really going like a mile a minute and leading up to the conference tomorrow. And I cried. I mean, I was stunned at just how beautiful it is, and also the fact that we have undergraduate students that obviously have not grown up with Joni Mitchell's music unless their parents were huge fans and they raided their record collection and heard it in the house. But they're finding that it is really speaking to them in a very special way. And in the video performance of this, as I said, it's going to close the conference tomorrow. And seeing these fresh faces and hearing these fresh voices, just making this incredible thing happen with A Case of You. It's, on the one hand, music is music, and on the other hand, there's always going to be something that is kind of inexplicable about it. Why this is speaking to them, and why it spoke so deeply to my student Sarah Marzi is, I can't explain it, but I'm sure glad it happened.
Yeah. So we have to do this very quickly because I've messed up the clock or something. But Carol Ann, I mean, to say an obvious thing, we're going to go out of this with a song of yours that is influenced by Joni Mitchell. But there would be almost no way to try to parse or tease out Joni Mitchell's influence on contemporary songwriters. I mean, it's like almost you name anybody, Norah Jones, Aoife O'Donovan, anybody you like, you'd have to wonder how you could even get Joni Mitchell's DNA out of this music if you wanted to, but you probably have something far more profound than that to say about it.
Well, it's true. I mean, I'm not sure I'd more profound, but I heartily agree with you. I mean, when I was thinking about, was I influenced by Joni Mitchell? Absolutely, both directly and indirectly. Not that. And then I tried to find a song that illustrated that, and it was difficult for me to I think I've written hundreds of songs in my life and published so many of them, and it was difficult for me to find the direct influence. But here's the thing, as you say, Joni influenced so many people that I grew up listening to. When I talked about hearing Joni for the first time in, let's say, the late 80s, the early 90s. I was also at the time hearing Sean Colvin for the first time. I was hearing Indigo Girls for the first time. I was hearing Tracy Chapman for the first time, Suzanne Vega. All of these people can draw a line back to Joni. And Prince, I'm a huge Prince fan, and he draws a line back to Joni, which I didn't find out until many years later, and he talks about having been at one of her concerts. And her influence, it's almost a fool's errand to try and parse it out, especially with artists outside of jazz. It's easier when they do something like the Joni letters. You can trace it right back there, but it's tentacles. They reach everywhere.
So, by the way, Prince not only does that incredible cover, he actually mentions "Help Me" in one of his lyrics. There's something about Joni Mitchell "Help Me" is on the radio. All right, so we're going to go out of this segment with Right Here, Carol Ann's song, which is from the 2018 Carol Ann Solabella album Shiver. Here we go, Right Here.
I'm right here at the corner table with my coffee, waiting to be thunderstruck or maybe just amused, searching for some words that hang together or a tune that's worth remembering, scratching down to use. I'm right here, just behind the ficus near the window, hiding from the world or maybe wishing to be seen, smiling for the boy who fills the sugar and the cream as I disappear behind this. Moons and Junes and Ferris wheels, the dizzy dancing way that you feel as every fairy tale comes real. I've looked at love that way, but now it's just another show, and you leave them laughing when you go.
Oh, Alan Rickman, how could you do that to Emma Thompson? Your whole marriage is wrecked now. See, that's now my association with that particular recording of that song. That, of course, is Joni Mitchell in later years, conducted and arranged by the great Vince Mendoza, a Connecticut boy. His sister Santa used to be a friend of mine. I haven't seen her in a while, but she ran against Blumenthal for Attorney General in 2000. So before we get into the conversation about this, I want to thank once again Kat Pastor, technical producer, under the weather from her Johnson & Johnson vaccine, but we know she'll be safe now. And of course, Betsy Kaplan, senior producer of the Colin McEnroe Show, produced this episode with these terrific guests: Peter Kaminsky from UConn, Steve Metcalf, who is our resident musical guru, and Carol Ann Solabello, singer-songwriter, founding member of the American trio Red Molly, and tours with the folk quartet No Fuss and Feathers. All right, so Steve, we should say something about this. Joni Mitchell kind of famously started smoking at the age of 9 and really kept at it. And this is possibly one of the reasons that, Carol Ann was worried a little while ago about staying up with Joni's range. Well, Joni's come down not only to where Carol Ann might be, but to a considerably lower tone than that as well. And it's a little jarring the first time you hear that.
Well, it sure is, and I just want to say, even all these years later, I can't listen to that re-recording version without choking up a little bit. It's just overwhelming. We've been talking about Joni, and I don't think the word courage has come up yet, but I'd like to toss it in here because I think courage, really of various kinds, is a sort of hallmark of this woman's life and career. I mean, certainly in terms of the self-revealingness and the confessional nature of her lyrics, but also, as we've been talking about, the fact that at every step of the way, she had the courage to leave behind whatever the sound world of the previous album had been and explore a whole different one. And in many cases, this upset her fans and made people say, well, she's reached the end of the road. And I think it's a 2000 album, the Vince Mendoza album that we just heard the clip from was another kind of act of courage. I mean, here was this woman who, as you point out, has this now cigarette ravaged voice, where once upon a time it was this sweet Colin soprano, and yet she puts it out there for us without self-consciousness, and of course it just tore everybody up, and I think remains one of the great statements of her musical career. But it's courageous. I mean, it's at every turn she's been courageous, and she has just not followed the easy comfort zone path of a pop star.
Can I speak to?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, Peter.
Can I speak to one other aspect of that courage? It's a really important and really great point, I think, that you make, Steve. And we know that she suffered polio at 9 years old, and it took her well over a year to recover. And one of the things that came out of that for her was it weakened her left hand. And so the fact that she went on to become one of the most we talked about her piano playing, but she went on to become one of the most influential guitarists and innovative guitarists, in part because she freely admits that she didn't have the strength or agility in her left hand to become, say, a jazz guitarist or be able to play those shapes very fluently. So being the painter and just being so sensitive to color that she began experimenting with tunings. And so in her guitar-oriented songs, which are like about 107, I think, she uses 51 different tunings. Some of them she uses one tuning for a single song. They're one-offs. And this it's one of the aspects of her sound that is particularly interesting to me as a researcher, that in her interview, she talks about like sitting out in a field and tuning to the weather and the sun and the wind blowing and the birds singing. So she's in this space, and then the chord shapes and the voicings of the chords and how that leads to the riff that is central to the song is replicated over and over again. So I was actually kind of curious, Carol Ann, whether in your playing of Joni Mitchell, especially since you covered the whole Blue album, whether you've gotten into exploring her tunings.
Minimally, because they are difficult. And I on that same show where I did the vocal on Blue, I did not play the piano. My friend Alison Tartaglia played the piano on that song, but I played for another artist who sang California, and I used Joni's open tuning, which was a challenge for me, but I had to learn. I didn't play it exactly the way she did. I have played Coyote in other shows using Joni's tunings, and her rhythmic sense is unique. Really, it doesn't jive with what I would naturally play. So it's kind of there's a little bending involved to get into it. But there's one other thing I wanted to address about those open tunings and Joni creating them in a field or tuning to whatever. This is what artists do when they are learning an instrument. Like when I was younger and I was first learning to play the guitar, I just played what sounded good to me. I wasn't sure about what the chord names were or what constitutes a conventional chord progression or anything. Joni never lost that, which is something that is so beautiful to me. Like, I've lost that. I fall into patterns all of the time, and I know lots of my friends, we talk about this thing, but Joni stayed curious musically. Joni stayed a complete open book and allowed herself not to be influenced by the market or other musicians, but just to be influenced by the sounds of around her and the sounds inside of her own head, and she had that youthful curiosity all through her career.
So we only have like a minute or two left, but Steve Metcalf, one thing that you brought up with Betsy Kaplan was, a few years ago, Bob Dylan won the Nobel Prize for Literature. Whether or not Bob Dylan realizes that happened is an open question, I think. But you sort of said, well, why not Joni Mitchell? So spend a minute or so making that case.
Okay, so this will occasion any number of angry emails, but I didn't have a big problem with Dylan getting the Nobel. I mean, in some ways it was sort of refreshing, and it's nice for people of our generation to sort of see the music we grew up with be validated by, the suits over there in Stockholm. But the more I thought about it, I don't know exactly what the Nobel people thought they were rewarding, but the fact of the matter is that Dylan musically is an artist, forgive me out there, fans, who hasn't particularly grown in the half century that he's been at this. Joni, by contrast, is not only a consummate writer of lyrics and, beautiful word painting, but whose music is, as we've all been saying here, toweringly original. And so you have to wonder, I mean, maybe there's another prize to be had out here, but all I would say is that if Dylan is worthy of that, so is she.
It certainly is true about the music growing and changing, and I think a lot of people drop out. They can't change. I think Caroline was making this point. They can't change as fast as Joni can, so they often don't keep up. I actually think the only album that was a real failure for me was Shine, the last one, which I didn't think was particularly good. But everything else, Night Ride Home, such an overlooked and really terrific Joni Mitchell album.
Love it.
Yeah, and getting some love from everybody else here, too. Yeah. All right, so we should end with a song here, and we're going to end with River. But thanks very much to these three wonderful guests, Peter Kaminsky, Steve Metcalf, Carol Ann Solobello, and here's Joni.
They're putting up reindeer, singing songs of joy and peace. I wish I had a river I could skate